Okay, so there is this incredibly complex geopolitical chess match unfolding right now. And right at the center of it, India and Turkey. And what we're going to break down here is how India seems to be using this ancient, really intricate military strategy to push back against Turkey's growing ambitions. So let's get right into what that actually means. So the big question is, are we watching the very first moves of a brand new great game? One that's playing out in the Eastern Mediterranean and even further? That's really the heart of what we're digging into today, this whole complicated web of new alliances and old rivalries. All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about this Chakravyuh for Turkey. Then, we'll look at India's moves in the Mediterranean. After that, we dive into the India-Israel strategic connection. Then, we'll switch gears to Pakistan's gamble in Libya. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see the larger game plan. Okay, let's start with the absolute core of the strategy we're talking about, this idea of a Chakravyuh being used against Turkey. So, what in the world is a Chakravyuh? So, a Chakravyuh is this really cool ancient Indian military formation. The whole point is to create a multi-layered, almost inescapable attack. Imagine it like a strategic labyrinth you lure your enemy into, hitting them from all sides at once. It makes it almost impossible to defend. And that is the perfect metaphor for what India seems to be doing to Turkey right now. So, you might be asking, why this kind of response from India? Well, it all comes down to a series of pretty ambitious moves by Turkey. For starters, there's this big push to revive its old Ottoman influence. Then, you've got this challenge for leadership of the Islamic world and the forming of a new axis with countries like Pakistan. And to top it all off, Turkey has taken a pretty consistent anti-India stance, especially when it comes to Kashmir at the UN. Okay, so that's the why. Now let's get into the how. How is India actually making this happen? Well, the first big front is the Eastern Mediterranean, literally in Turkey's own backyard. India is basically hitting this from three different angles. First up, supporting Cyprus. The Indian Prime Minister paid a very pointed visit to the sensitive UN buffer zone there, which is a huge signal to Turkey since they back northern Cyprus. Number two, they're arming Armenia. We're talking sophisticated Panaka rockets and key intelligence for one of Turkey's biggest regional rivals. And number three, they're building a really strong alliance with Greece, another one of Turkey's old rivals. This means stronger military ties and even planning economic routes that are designed to just go around Turkey completely. And if you want to see just how bold these moves are, check this out. An Indian warship recently sailed right through waters in the Mediterranean that Turkey says are theirs. I mean, the message couldn't be clearer. It was basically a direct challenge, saying, what are you going to do about it? We'll do whatever we want. All right, now let's talk about what might be the single most critical piece of this whole anti-Turkey coalition, the strategic partnership between India and Israel, which is getting deeper and stronger by the day. And this really gets to the core of why they're working together. You see, on one hand, you have Israel. They're worried about their weapons supply chains, and they're starting to see Turkey as a major future threat. They need a solid partner. On the other hand, you've got India, dealing with this growing Turkey-Pakistan access and really needing high-end defense tech. Well, they find that perfect partner in Israel. It's really a textbook case of a shared threat creating a very powerful alliance. And believe me, this partnership is not just about talk and handshakes. We're seeing Israel actually move parts of its weapons production to India to make its supply chain more secure. And what does India get? Well, they get access to that awesome high-end tech and the ability to make it themselves for their own military. And maybe the most important part? They're sharing deep strategic intelligence on their common rivals, Turkey and Pakistan. And then there's this, a pretty bold claim that suggests that once Israel deals with Hamas and Hezbollah, its next big strategic target is going to be Turkey. Now, if that's true, it takes this partnership with India from just being important to being absolutely essential for both countries. But hey, this isn't a one-sided game at all. While India's building its coalition, Pakistan is making its own moves to push back. And that brings us to a really complicated situation that's playing out over in North Africa. $4 billion. That's the number at the center of Pakistan's big play. A massive $4 billion defense deal in, of all places, Libya. Now that is a huge amount of money, especially for a country that's facing some pretty serious economic problems. So the really critical question here is, who is Pakistan actually making this deal with? Because Libya is basically split in two. You have the UN-recognized government in Tripoli, and then you have this rival group in Benghazi, led by a guy named Khalifa Haftar. And here's the kicker. Pakistan's huge deal? It's with the unrecognized Haftar faction. They're completely bypassing the government that the rest of the world recognizes. And to try and lock down this deal, get this. Pakistan's army chief apparently made some pretty wild claims while in Libya. He was boasting about defeating India with so-called homegrown Pakistani technology, even saying they shot down all these advanced Indian jets. Now, these are claims that, have been pretty wildly disputed. Okay, but let's take a closer look at that homegrown tech. The reality is a little different. The fighter jet in question, about 95% of its parts come from China. Pakistan's role is mostly just putting it all together. I mean, apparently even the screwdrivers they use are from China. And it gets worse. Myanmar, who also bought these jets, had to ground their whole fleet because the frames literally started cracking. Okay, so you've got all these different pieces moving on the chessboard, right? From the Mediterranean all the way to North Africa. So what's the end game here? Let's zoom out, connect the dots, and look at the bigger picture. For India, this Chakravyuh strategy is the whole package. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of diplomatic encirclement, new military partnerships, creating different economic routes, and sharing intelligence. All of these things are happening at the same time, designed to strategically surround their rivals. And for Pakistan, well, since a direct military fight with India isn't really on the table, the real goal seems to be winning a narrative war. What does that mean? It means pulling together a coalition of countries, like Turkey and Libya, to challenge India on the diplomatic stage, at places like the UN, and to just push their side of the story. So it's pretty clear this whole geopolitical chess match is heating up. Alliances are getting stronger, big strategic moves are being made, and both sides are fighting to control the story. All the pieces are on the board and in motion. And that leaves us with just one big question. What happens next?